Good afternoon. Welcome to the Center for Disaster Philanthropy webinar, Beyond the Typical Grant, Alternative Ways to Fund Disasters. And my name is Patricia McIlreavy, and I'm the President and CEO of the Center for Disaster Philanthropy. I have more than 25 years of experience in international humanitarian policy and practice, bringing a unique blend of operational and strategic expertise to disaster philanthropy. Throughout my career, I have focused on improving the effectiveness and impact of the aid sector, and this extends to philanthropy as well. Today's topic is closely tied to how the sector can be more effective and impactful in service of community, and I'm looking forward to the conversation. My pronouns are she, her, hers. Some reminders today before we get started. You can submit questions at any time using the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and we will answer them at the end of the panel presentation. If you're on Twitter, please use hashtag CDP4Recovery, that's CDP, the number 4 recovery, to share and join the discussion. And don't forget to follow us on @FundsForDisaster. At the end of the webinar, there will be a short survey. Please complete this to help us improve our webinar offerings to better meet your needs. And finally, we are recording this webinar. It will be available on our website and YouTube channel shortly after the webinar is complete. Live captioning is available now via Zoom. Click on Closed Caption Live Transcript to access it. More accurate captions will be provided in the recording. This webinar is co-sponsored by Council on Foundations, Giving Compass, Philanthropy California, Philanthropy New York, and Peak Grantmaking. We thank them all for their support. As we begin the webinar, CDP acknowledges that we are working from the stolen lands of the many original peoples. We recognize that Indigenous peoples have been displaced and disenfranchised from their land by the socioeconomic and cultural disaster of colonialism, as well as disasters. We acknowledge when the U.S. was founded that there were exclusions and erasures of Indigenous knowledge about how to appropriately care for these lands, causing environmental destruction and degradation, which has had a significant impact on disaster risk and on communities. We are committed to dismantling the ongoing legacies, systems, and structures of settler colonialism and white supremacy. We commit ourselves to understand where and how wealth accumulation has harmed people, the earth itself, and the complexities of philanthropy is connected to that truth. Despite centuries of theft, violence, and murder, this is and always will be Indigenous land. Please join us and acknowledge the original peoples and their elders, past and present, as well as future generations. At the end of the webinar, funders will understand different tools for funding beyond grants, be aware of opportunities to fund organizations without 501c3 status, domestically and internationally, and learn from notable donors supporting diverse programs worldwide in new and effective ways. Grants are the primary way that most funders, including CDP, distribute funding to advance their goals and support community. However, there are other ways to fund organizations and groups that can be considered, including impact investments, fiscal sponsorships, and support for individuals. Our speakers will go into more detail about these. Alternative ways of funding are especially important as the organizations and people funders want to succeed are faced with increasing obstacles and uncertainties in their work. As Riva Kantowitz says in this quote, "The situations on the ground often evolve quickly." Just pause for a moment so you can read the quote. Climate change, the COVID pandemic, the movement for racial justice, and the rise of complex humanitarian emergencies worldwide are examples of challenges that are not always predictable and have different time horizons, requiring funders to move beyond the status quo. To address and overcome these challenges, greater flexibility and adaptability is needed, not only on the part of the organization's philanthropy support, but on the part of philanthropy itself. New ways of working are necessary, including how funds are dispersed, and that is what we are here today to explore. In the United States, funders usually focus on making grants to organizations with a 501c3 or other tax-exempt designation from the Internal Revenue Service. Organizations described in Section 501c3 are commonly referred to as charitable or nonprofit organizations and are eligible to receive tax-deductible contributions. There are organizations, movements, and individuals that are doing impactful work at the local level and that may align with the funder's values and goals, but do not have 501c3 status. Rather than the only solution being to pursue and receive 501c status, there are opportunities to invest in organizations and people that may not choose or may not be able to receive such status from the U.S. government. The idea that the people closest to issues are best placed to address them is not new, but despite discussions on the importance of community ownership and localization of humanitarian aid, funding to local organizations continues to lag. For example, in their 2022 Global Humanitarian Assistance Report, Development Initiatives found that from 2017 to 2021, direct international humanitarian funding to local and national actors halved from 603 million to 302 million. When looking at the share of total direct funding to these actors, these figures represent a drop from 2.8% in 2017 to 1.2% in 2021. Funder practices need to be driven not solely by their own needs and desires, but by the organizations and people they wish to support. Now it is my honor to introduce our special guest. I'm looking forward to the information they will share with us. Baylen Campbell is Invest Appalachia's Director of Community Impact. Originally from and born in Hazard, Kentucky, Baylen brings experience working as an economic development and social impact practitioner with experience working in emergency response situations in the US and abroad. Baylen works to shape Invest Appalachia's strategic priorities, community engagement, to drive impact across Central Appalachia. Also, while we were getting ready for this conversation today, he was sharing about how he himself has been impacted by the disaster of the floods in Central Kentucky. So wanted to just share that life experience of his as well. Courtney Eskew has led GlobalGiving's team of seasoned grant professionals committed to accelerating community-led change since 2012. In this role, Courtney is committed to co-creating custom grant programs with donors while offering best-in-class grant-making advisory services. Her work aspires to build relationships with funders and grantees that is rooted in dialogue, trust, and collective learning. Lita Pardi has more than 20 years of experience working at the nonprofit and philanthropy space and is Programs and Knowledge Director at Peak Grantmaking. In this role, Lita leads the strategy and execution of Peak's events and sector convenings to elevate effective, efficient, and equitable philanthropic practices, advances the principles of Peak Grantmaking, and advocates for their adoption by grantmakers. Welcome to each of you, and thank you for taking the time today to share your expertise with us. Lita, let's start with you. When we're thinking about grass tops or grassroots organizations, what do we need to adjust to support them compared to 501c3s?
Thank you, Patty. Well, here are a few things. If you could go to the next slide, please. Here are a few things that funders should consider as they begin funding grass tops or grassroots organizations. Really need to consider how you engage with these organizations. Are you engaging directly with them, or are you connected to intermediary organizations like community foundations or community-focused organizations that have the connections with the grassroots community? Because trust is going to be something that you have to build. You should revisit your outreach strategies and platforms, considering that not all organizations are going to respond to requests for proposals. They might not be signed up to receive a newsletter. They're not on LinkedIn or Facebook, but they might be on other social media platforms. A couple other things. Think about how often you offer the funding opportunities, as grassroots advocacy work doesn't tend to happen on a schedule. Consider how big or small your grant is, and know that with grassroots organizations, you can often give smaller grants to spur innovation, create an advocacy tool, affect change. Engage those organizations in helping determine what's the right size of your grant. And lastly, you want to narrow that power gap with the grassroots grantees. Engage in a two-way learning journey. You can help build their organizational capacity, but you can also learn as a funder a lot from those folks.
That's great information. Thank you, Lita. And in fact, some of those things would be good even for 501c3s in terms of just being very much more nimble in your approaches.
Yes.
Courtney, there have been an increasing number of complex humanitarian emergencies and disasters around the world. How can a US-based funder approach making a grant to a non-501c3 in this broader context of disasters?
Thanks, Patty. I'm going to focus most of my answer to this in what it looks like for a US-based funder to partner with an intermediary. And an intermediary is effectively a philanthropic bridge. It's one of the tools that Lita just offered. We are mission-driven organizations that provide specialized expertise to foundations and other donors, and in particular through the regranting of funds to charitable projects. In this context, to organizations registered outside of the United States and working in their local, well, to us, global communities. So that expertise may include legal knowledge of US and other government guidelines, a deep understanding of a specific issue or region around the world, or capacity building and support to grantees. So our host, Center for Disaster Philanthropy, is an intermediary like GlobalGiving, and other like-minded institutions are as well, from Charities Aid Foundation to Give to Asia to local community foundations. So this bridge building provides value in the broader context of disasters because, as Patty already mentioned, only a portion of humanitarian funding reaches local actors. And that's for varied reasons, such as restrictions placed on US funders, a funder's own risk tolerance, and ultimately community-led organizations just aren't as visible and accessible as multinational disaster organizations. There's no global charity database comparable to IRS Pub 78, the data driving verification through sites like GuideStar and Charity Navigator to point us to those local actors. So donors end up relying on intermediaries to surface those that are closest to the communities. GlobalGiving, we fund thousands of nonprofits working in over 170 countries each year, and some have annual budgets of $5,000. Some are working with $1 million budgets, but they come to GlobalGiving with a specific project that their community, not a donor, has identified as needing funding. So this makes us uniquely positioned when a humanitarian crisis strikes to learn who are the local actors responding, who may literally be on the front lines providing a specific need, like getting diapers to the infants that have been evacuated from a fire, because that nonprofit was delivering diaper kits well before the wildfire broke out. So just briefly, I'll share how this connects to GlobalGiving's Ukraine Crisis Relief Fund. We've raised a little over $50 million because donors trust this network of community-led nonprofits and our ability to identify those closest to the crisis. And one of our existing partner organizations in Poland, whose name translates in English to Pay It Forward Foundation, they spent 2 years before the crisis erupted into war raising funds for people with disabilities. So I'll share some words directly from them describing the evacuation of a disabled man, whose name was Vera, his wife and 2 young daughters. They drove almost 14 hours to the Polish border crammed in a bus, arrived at our foundation 3 hours ago, very tired, are resting, will determine what they need, make necessary purchases, and in the coming days begin his rehabilitation. And I share this just because despite disbursement restrictions in Russia, this is one of 100 pre-existing relationships that we have with groups in the region, allowing us to make grants locally. And that's why I'm focusing on intermediaries as one tool, because this slide that I have showing here is a huge opportunity for US funders to explore new avenues of giving.
And that's great. Great point about the scale and being respective of the different size organizations and how you can work with them. Baylen, I want to move to you now. What are the different catalytic capital tools that Invest Appalachia provides?
Thanks, Patty. On this next slide, that you'll see the 4 catalytic capital products that Invest Appalachia offers in the Central Appalachian region. Each of these products are designed to fill gaps in the investment ecosystem. They're meant to be tailored to specific projects or deals to help move a project from investment worthy to investment ready. This will assist in the development of each sector and will be used individually and often in tandem with Invest Appalachia's private investment dollars. We break our catalytic capital into subpools. So along the lines of each of our geographies, we cover 6 states, as well as 4 priority sectors, including clean energy, community health, food and agriculture, and creative placemaking. But in addition to that, I'm working to build out additional subpools of catalytic capital that focus on equity. So population-specific pools of resources to support women, BIPOC, and queer-owned entrepreneurs and initiatives. Lastly, and most applicable for this, is a subpool for climate adaptation and resilience. We will be able to utilize these dollars to support a wide variety of projects to explore and ensure how investment dollars are being used to not only catalyze economic development, but also to help our communities adapt their built-in natural environments to weather climate shocks and/or recover after a disaster. Specifically, I want to hone in on our credit enhancements, which will be the bulk of our catalytic capital use. These dollars go directly into the accounts of a business, an entrepreneur, or a nonprofit. And at the end of the day, those dollars are used to leverage more additional funds. And then after a determined term, those resources come back to us so that they can be redeployed and used again.
That's incredibly interesting and creative ways to work. And I want to stay with you, Baylen, and talk about another tool, if we may. What is impact investment? What is the value add for that compared to a traditional grant?
Yeah, absolutely. So impact investing is rooted in the goal of catalyzing markets to address social inequality. Many impact investing initiatives use a blended capital approach, which is a mix of private investment dollars and philanthropic dollars, or catalytic capital. Within IA and during this webinar, when I'm referring to catalytic capital, I'm only speaking about philanthropic dollars. But on the whole, by providing communities who have historically been unable to access capital, impact investing, specifically with a blended capital approach, we are able to create multiple flows of capital moving into communities that can absorb risk in order to leverage additional resources. And in communities like mine in Central Appalachia, where extraction has caused intergenerational poverty and longitudinal environmental disasters, we are able to provide non-extractive financing that's community aligned. When I take a step back, my partner, this seems like a tangent, but I promise it's not. My partner is a clinical pharmacist with a specific interest in oncology. So I'm constantly learning, willingly or not, about innovative medical treatments. When I think about philanthropy, how philanthropy can go beyond the grant, I think of grants like a standard regimen of care, essential, foundational, and sustaining. Impact investing is another tool that can work in conjunction with that. Almost like gene therapy, it's tailored at the cellular level to maximize impact and reshape how our cells and systems are functioning. In impact investing, we're learning by doing. We're tailoring solutions at the community level, challenging inequities by infusing resources to augment challenges and reshape markets. I want to be clear, one tool cannot replace the other. Effective patient care and community development require a holistic approach. To root this, in the last 2 weeks, post disastrous flooding, we've seen Appalachian folks in my communities and across the region respond with incalculable levels of resilience. People here are used to doing more with less because we have to. Our region receives $43 per capita in grant dollars on the national average, which is compared to the national average, which is $451. And we receive less than 1% of overall venture capital investment. This is a region typecast as being often backwards, hillbillies, but the region has a long legacy of resistance and solidarity. The term hillbilly is rooted in a source of pride. It was what landowning Southern whites called mountain whites, who allied with Black Southerners to form a working class voting bloc, similar to the term rednecks, which is originally organized, refers to organized mine workers resisting coal companies. My challenge to philanthropy is to be more resourceful like hillbillies, be more like us. Let's use all the tools at our disposal to innovate and reshape how systems work. Grantmaking, as we all know, is often only the required IRS 5% payout of an endowment, with the other 95% sitting in the stock market, with which Those dollars are often not aligned with foundation's mission. What would happen if even a small portion of those 95% of that 95% were used to invest in Main Street with a lens towards equity and resilience? In communities like mine, where we are working towards parity and post-disaster, those dollars would not just be restorative, they would be transformative.
That's really incredible and a good way to position it. There's one quick question that came in, and I want to just capture, Baylen, before we move on, because I don't want us to move on with people not understanding fully what you talked about. Can you explain very briefly what is non-extractive repayment?
So that those dollars stay within the region. So the payments function more like equity within Invest Appalachia, and that they're patient. We have longer term periods, lower interest rates, so that the investment itself stays within the region.
Great, thank you. Lita, let's talk about fiscal sponsors, both from an organizational side and from the perspective of the funder. What do we need to know?
Thanks, Patty. We could go to the next slide. So the first thing to know is that there are many models for fiscal sponsorships. I think it's maybe like 7 or 8 models. And if you're interested in learning more about all the different models, there are resources on the web that explain the other types. But I'm going to focus on 2 models because those are the models that we tend to see most often. So the first you see here is the comprehensive model, where the fiscal sponsor assumes 100% ownership and responsibility over a project or a program. So this is where somebody has started a project in the community, and then they decide, they really want to become part of an organization. And so that parent organization absorbs the program, and that program becomes a part of that fiscal sponsor's organization. They assume all the control and the staffing of that program. So you see that a lot of times when things just kind of get started and then somebody kind of absorbs them. The other type that we see very often is this fundraising grant relationship, where there's a program or a project that is in the community. It has been created. It has volunteers often running that program, and they want to receive charitable dollars. And so they find an organization that is exempt to be their fiscal sponsor. And so those folks who created the program maintain ownership of the program, but the fiscal sponsor retains the ability to direct the funds that are raised, because they are the ones who are receiving those funds, and they can direct those funds to other organizations that meet the charitable purpose if they want to, though that typically only happens under some like egregious circumstances. And so one of the things that, as funders go out and they're talking with organizations, and this is where a grassroots organization comes up kind of frequently, they have a fiscal sponsor. So you need to determine what kind of relationship or model they are operating under. And so once you know that, you can ask that organization that you want to support different questions. And one of the things that I always asked was to see the agreement that they had between the fiscal sponsor and the organization, just to understand what are the roles and responsibilities. How is the money going to exchange hands? And the other thing for funders to think about is, as you are stewarding responsibly the funds that you have, how do you adjust your due diligence process so that you are conducting due diligence on that fiscal sponsor, but in the right size, right? So that you might ask for a financial document or 2, but you might not put that organization through your entire process. But that's something that funders have to decide on their own. And then I just want to add a few words about on the organization side. So organizations that are looking for fiscal sponsors, they need to seek alignment between what their mission of their program, their project is, and whoever's going to serve as their fiscal sponsor. Alignment, as missions go, and perhaps as like service areas and things like that, so that it makes sense that there is this close relationship between the two. The other thing that organizations who are using fiscal sponsors need to be prepared to do is to talk about their fiscal sponsor relationship. And the same goes for those organizations that are acting as fiscal sponsors. They need to make sure that their staff can say, yes, we are a fiscal sponsor to this organization. And that when you're a funder and you call an organization to inquire about this kind of relationship, that the staff that you're speaking with aren't completely clueless as to a relationship of this nature that their organization has.
That's great. Thank you so much for that. I mean, Courtney, I'm going to turn over to you, back to you. Can you describe how GlobalGiving works with corporate philanthropy?
I would be happy to. So GlobalGiving works with corporate philanthropy really by building trust and reducing risk. I've listed here a few of the areas in which we partner with companies. That might be on employee and consumer giving activations, philanthropic consultation, different grant making programs, serving as a fund manager, cause marketing, and then really integrating the data available on our website into a user interface that the company owns, which is called an API. But at the core of all of these offerings for partnership is GlobalGiving's vetting. And the way that we think about due diligence, which Lita just mentioned in the context of fiscal sponsors, is that it's a trust building opportunity with the nonprofits that we hope to eventually fund. And it's a trust building mechanism between the donor and the nonprofit as well. When we think about risk in the context of philanthropy, it's often said that it's ill-defined, but there are 4 key categories of risk that we can frame due diligence activities around. Those include compliance risk, program implementation risk, financial transparency, and then reputation risk. So in our approach of vetting nonprofit organizations, we are effectively creating a balance between IRS regulations for private foundations that a corporate philanthropist would typically fall under, and then our desire to right-size the process itself and remember that these nonprofits know their communities the best and that the regulatory environment really looks different from country to country. So that particular process is called equivalency determination. And by partnering with GlobalGiving, corporate philanthropists, as their intermediary, we really take on the responsibility, both fiscal and legal, of ensuring that not only are the nonprofits verified, but they are safe to give to. What I've shown here is an example of one program in the context of disaster in which GlobalGiving serves as a partner to Meta. And this particular program is on their Facebook platform. So the Facebook and GlobalGiving Crisis Response Partnership began about 5 years ago, and a donate button pops up and is created for every crisis for which Safety Check activates. So if you're a Facebook user, you may have seen somebody mark themselves safe if they were near a wildfire, for example. And GlobalGiving is responsible for directing those funds that are raised to verified and primarily local nonprofit partner organizations in the impacted areas. And we rely on, again, this really diverse portfolio of community partner organizations that are responding to whatever safety check activation disaster is created. And the donations that sometimes may appear modest, but our partners are extremely effective and creative with those funds. So just two small examples. During Tropical Storm Imelda, a little over $5,000 was awarded to West Street Recovery. And with that, they were able to muck and repair homes and facilitate a community meeting. Whereas there was $600 that was raised for an Alaska, the McKinley fire in Alaska, and that funded the firefighter and their peer support program, which was focused on mental health. I also like this example because our partnership with then Facebook started in this context, but it's since grown to include several other programs, such as their community accelerator, where the company is investing millions of dollars in individual change makers who have developed online communities in a specific issue area and provide capacity building training as well as funding, which GlobalGiving manages. So I have a lot more to say about how we partner with corporate philanthropy, and I'm happy to answer questions.
Courtney, I'd like to come back to your comment about individuals. I mean, you've been able to capitalize on the IRS legislation to provide support to individuals. Could you share a bit more about how you and Spanx supported women-owned businesses during the pandemic?
Yes, yes, I can. So Sarah Blakely, the founder of Spanx, which is a women's shapewear company, is a driven and effective business leader. She also has a joyous, bigger than life personality, and she started her company with $5,000. She's also a generous philanthropist who, witnessing the pandemic's impact on other women-owned businesses, intimately understood many of them needed support and fast to make it through lockdown. Not many funders grant directly to individuals or to businesses because they aren't inherently charitable like a 501c3. It is possible to do. US donors can get prior approval from the IRS to implement these types of programs. They can award grants through a pretty restrictive process called expenditure responsibility. But bringing a vision like Sarah's to life meant that we at GlobalGiving couldn't get lost in the how. We already had the infrastructure to vet individuals and businesses and disperse funds to them at scale. It was actually developed to launch that community accelerator I just mentioned. But what we wanted was a trust-based grant-making practice, one that wouldn't burden these struggling businesses with reporting and unnecessary paperwork. So we looked at IRS publication 3833, which is for people interested in assisting victims of disasters or those experiencing hardship during a national emergency, floods, riots, storms, similar large-scale events. And because COVID-19 was declared a national disaster by the president, these guidelines provided some flexibility in making grants to non-charities, specifically providing disaster assistance to women-owned and distressed businesses as defined by certain eligibility criteria. That met the definition of charitable class for the IRS, meaning our grants would combat community deterioration and lessen the burdens of government. And they were one-time $5,000 grants, so the appropriateness of continuation wasn't a consideration. Grant agreements covered terms for tax-exempt payments, and most importantly, didn't ask for any reporting from these women. Now, two of the women are shown here, and we did provide them with media kits so that on receipt of an award, they could input just a little bit of information and tell their own story, but it was completely optional. I am not a lawyer, but my work on the Red Backpack Fund does prompt me to speak nerd sometime. So thanks for indulging this balance between regulatory environments and the desire for impact. I personally believe that we have a responsibility as funders to navigate and unlock opportunities to fund these types of change makers if they are the ones closest to and leading impact work in their communities. And it requires us to get out of our comfort zones and navigate what sometimes are confusing guidelines for funders.
That's a great point. Really important to kind of sit with that a minute, that it really is on the funders to be creative, to find ways to help, adapt and look for solutions. Really want to just echo that. Baylen, can you provide examples of how Invest Appalachia's model is informed by and involves the community and project planning and implementation? How does that lend towards increasing community resilience?
Thanks. So IA's overall model was developed through an extensive multi-stakeholder engagement process with a broad swath of regional partners, including CDFIs and community foundations, taking inspiration from impact investing models internationally. So really working to overlay international development models into a domestic context. Through that process, I has a community advisory council, which is a built-in community accountability mechanism. The membership of the CAC is intersectional and intersectoral, but the common connection is that these folks have their ear to the ground in the community and economic development space across our geographies. Outside of setting the priorities for catalytic capital deployment, impact refinement, and assisting with pipeline development, this mechanism will act as a thought partner and, in certain circumstances, governor, so that if at any point investments are not working to complement catalytic capital priorities, then we can collectively hit pause and realign. And in our practices, operating practices, because we know our communities, our model is designed so that we take our cues from the ground up. So as a part of our due diligence, we gauge community support for each individual project. We will also be engaging with partners about how sustainability and resilience fits within their priorities and planning for a project, and how we can connect them with partners and resources to help infuse that resilience into their work. Overall, we know that solutions are sown into community, and impact investing offers philanthropy an opportunity to cultivate that in a rooted and sustained way.
That's great. And I just think it's just, again, very critical to emphasize the community aspect, the centrality of the community and everything you were mentioning there, and how valuable that is towards their own solutions. We're going to move in a few moments to our Q&A, our question and answer section. And please use the tab at the bottom to add your questions for our speakers. Lita, while folks are doing that, one last question before we go to the audience. Grant making can be slow. But when there's an urgency in the moment, either through a disaster or some other crucial event, how do you figure out what changes to make for your grant processes?
Thank you, Patty. Yes, grant making can be very, very slow, but I mean, I'd say the COVID-19 pandemic really showed everyone how quickly philanthropy could move and what significant grants could be awarded very, very quickly in order to really support the communities across the country and the world really through this crisis. So, I mean, first, of course, as a funder, you have to decide how urgently you need to respond, right? What type of crisis is this? Do you want to provide, I'd say, support in response to the crisis, or support to help communities recover from the crisis? You know, that will help you determine the speed at which you need to move. Response funding needs to happen almost immediately. Recovery kind of funding can have a little bit more thought and more partnership with the communities, with the organizations in order to be effective. One easy, I'd say, kind of suggestion is for a funder to identify past grantees that you could support. This just means that you've already done your due diligence process. And I know from having spent many years working at a community foundation that, you know, there's a process and you have to recommend grants and, you know, it goes to board approval and all of those things. Well, if you are granting to past grantees, that kind of cuts out a lot of the due diligence process. However, if you're not going to just be able to support past grantees, you just have to determine which aspects of your process you can change or just completely eliminate, right? I will say at the start of the pandemic, I was working at the Community Foundation for Greater Atlanta, and many community foundations across the country ran COVID-19 response funds, recovery funds, and we partnered with the United Way of Greater Atlanta to do this. And awarding the dollars in response to the pandemic. Well, first of all, we received funding from a lot of private foundations in the Atlanta area to support the community. And so we knew that the expectation was for us to get those dollars out very, very quickly. So because of that, we very quickly said, well, let's scrap, all of this part of the process, and really what is essential for us to know from these organizations in order for us to feel comfortable awarding the dollars, right? And I think Courtney's talked a little bit about risk tolerance. A crisis really calls to question your risk tolerance and says to you, what are your values? Tie your practices to your values and just say, what do we really need to know? So a few other, I'd say, suggestions for you as you're adapting your processes. If you're not already awarding general operating support grants, these are the types of dollars that organizations in responding to a crisis need. Operating support, that unrestricted funding that is really hard to come by, that typically comes from individuals and not as much from foundations, though we have seen that change over the last, say 10 years probably. But really, operating support grants will give the organization that flexibility, not only to, I'd say, provide that direct community support that is needed, but also to fund their operations. Right, to add more staff if they need to respond to the crisis. Another point is to really right-size your grant. A couple of thoughts there. One is, of course, to make sure that it is correlated to the size of the crisis. Right, if you're able to award very large grants, to communities that have been ravaged by the floods, right? That it's going to cost so much money to help them recover. That it's costing so much money to provide drinking water and food into those communities. And so if you're able to, award those larger grants, be thoughtful about that, even if it's outside of your comfort zone. Crises kind of force us to do that. And then the last thought I have for you is to be transparent with your community. Communicate with folks and let them know, what it is that you're going to be doing, how it is that you're going to respond. Because a lot of times what happens is, word will trickle out that, this foundation is doing things this way, but nobody really knows because that foundation hasn't, made an announcement or posted something on social media to say, this is how we're responding, right? Sharing how you're responding will help organizations be able to see, okay, we should connect with them because we are responding to the crisis. If you keep that information to yourself, you're going to keep on supporting the same, organizations that you've always supported. And so it's just a great practice to be open, be transparent about how grants are going to, be processed and awarded, what are timelines, what can people expect? Those are just a few things to think about.
And those are all excellent suggestions, and I really like the time. In some ways, it's the time of the disaster is not the time to build those relationships. It's about having a lot of that pre-existing challenging to yourself and exploring how to be a better grant maker all the time, and taking that learning into the future. And so I just think that's really valuable messaging for the funders on the line. We've received several questions in advance. I'll be working through the list as well as what we receive in the Q&A. And so as a reminder, those CDP webinars, we're providing education for the philanthropic community. So while all questions are welcome, we will focus a bit on those that help address funder questions. And Baylen, I want to come to you first, if I may, which is just because of course, you know, Kentucky has just gone through and is still in the midst of a disaster. And how do we get grassroots? How can we better help grassroots organizations pre-position so that they're not only responsive to the crisis, but how can we get them to pre-position to activate prior to an event?
I think additional support for capacity building and planning on an ongoing basis in terms of how to engage with systems, knowing about and engaging and operationalizing systems for emergency response and natural disasters. That's something that a lot of nonprofits in our region have during the course of historic flooding over the last 2 years have had to learn on the fly. So I think that's certainly a large, an area of support that could be extended. As well as the fact that a lot of organizations are, engaging in mutual aid as a way to move resources as quickly as possible. So any way to support, cultivate, and nurture those networks.
That's great point. Great reminder about mutual aid as another aspect of helping. Courtney, I want to come to you about what legal requirements are there for organizations that have a legal recognition in their own country. So the requirements, organizations have a legal recognition in their own country, and they want where can we look for country-specific answer to this? In the sense of kind of a complicated question, sorry. What legal requirements are there for organizations that have a legal recognition in their own country, and where can we look for a country-specific answer to this question if considering a grant to an organization that is not connected to a 501c3?
That's a big question. And the answer is it depends on the country. There are countries with increasingly restrictive civil societies, which means that the governments of those countries are trying to control and monitor how funding comes in. So an example of that country is China. Several years ago, China implemented a new law that required funders to establish an office in China in order to make grants to local charities. So what that meant for funders in the United States and overseas is all of a sudden either you had to register an office or you had to work with an intermediary. GlobalGiving chose to open up an office in China. There are other countries where the motivations might be different, but the impact on charities is similar. And that ranges from Mexico to India, for example. And the broader answer on where can you look for country-specific information, it requires research and expertise. So there are several intermediary groups that can help you as a consultant understand what it takes to make a direct grant to that nonprofit. And it also depends on your own entity type. So private foundations, private philanthropists are required by the IRS to complete one of two approaches. One is equivalency determination, and there are entities like NGO Source that can do that due diligence and provide a certificate for you so that your team doesn't have to learn the intricate legal requirements. You can partner with an intermediary, or your team can issue what's called an expenditure responsibility grant that it provides certain terms to ensure that the funds are used charitably. So unfortunately, there's not a simple answer. It depends on the country. It depends on your funding entity and your desire to invest in the research and capabilities to actually make the grant, or desire to partner with a consultant or an intermediary to help you do that.
Great, thank you so much. Lita, I want to come to you. You spoke earlier about the types of fiscal sponsorship. I was wondering if we could get a little deeper into that, and what should private foundations consider when awarding grants to fiscal sponsors? And also, how could they strengthen and support organizations with fiscal sponsors?
Thanks, Patty. Well, because private foundations can't make grants to non-501c3 organizations, there's really, I'd say, the partnership aspect of this work is really important. I'm not a lawyer, but I think that there is expenditure responsibility that might be able to be used here. But Patty, I may, perhaps it's because I spent so many years at a community foundation, I think about the trust and relationships that foundations need to have with each other within their own communities, and just kind of be able to reach, across the aisle and say, hey, here's an organization we really want to support. They're not a 501c3. Is there a way that you, community foundation, or is it another nonprofit, could step in and serve as a fiscal sponsor for this organization? I'd say that's one easier kind of way for private foundations to approach the process. Your other question about how foundations can strengthen these organizations, I want to go back to what Baylen was talking about, which is really, help build their capacity, really understand what do these organizations want for their future. Some may want to become 501c3s and go through that whole application process, but some may say, we never want to be a 501c3. We understand the benefits, but we also know, how it would tie our hands. And so it's really to establish a relationship with these organizations and to learn from them, what is it that they want for themselves? And then ask them, how can we support you, right? Can we provide operating support? Can we hire a consultant to, work with you and the rest of the volunteers on a project or on infrastructure of the organization? Provide support for infrastructure, like I want to say expenses, like technology, right? Which when you think about a grassroots organization that's engaged in advocacy, sometimes technology, especially right now, that can really change the impact that organization has. And so it's just about being creative about how you support them. But to me, the foundation of it is the relationship between the funder and the organization, building that trust and having a real relationship where you can talk to each other and understand how the funder can really support them.
And I just have to share with the audience, you can't see, we've got a little internal communication going here, and the different participants were plusing to a lot of what Lita was saying. And I think just really want to underline that, so much is based on trust and being creative with your grantee partners, really listening to them, looking at informal systems and structures, exploring how to be outside the norm in what you can support, and making sure that that's an open relationship and they know that they can come to you. Lita, we're going to close with one last question to you, and that is, we talked about the intermediaries being a great way to explore getting your funding much more local, but how do we get to the data aspect of that? How do we capture then the percentage that goes to what might be seen as a national or global level 501c3, but who's transitioning a lot of their funds out? So how does GlobalGiving feed its information out into the wider communities about that local, how much is locally just destined versus what might sit with the originating 501c3?
And Patty, just to make sure that I understand the data piece correctly, are you asking what portion of funding that GlobalGiving manages goes to locally registered organizations?
Yeah, so we started with the statistics from development initiatives, and about how 1% or a little bit more than 1% is going to national actors directly. But we talked about the intermediaries being a solution, but that data is not necessarily being captured. So how could you talk a little bit about how much of your funding goes into local actors?
Yeah, so I think this the statistic for global giving is that 80% of our funding is going to organizations that are working in the same communities that they're registered in. We do not have eligibility requirements to join global giving based on this local component, because global giving was established with the belief that good ideas can come from anywhere at any time. What's happened in the history and evolution of our programming over the past 20 years is the profile of nonprofits that have been attracted to global giving are those that really rely on our technology as their fundraising mechanisms. So large multinational actors typically have fundraising teams. They also typically have their own websites and donor mechanisms, donation mechanisms. Global Giving provides all of that to our nonprofit partners behind our website as really a service, a direct service to grassroots organizations that are getting themselves up off of the ground. And there was a question here about supporting startup nonprofits. And that's really what Global Giving existed to do at first. And it's really a dominant piece of our community today. Now, when I expand this answer to include our work with corporate philanthropy, we work with private foundations or corporate foundations like Ford Motor Company Fund, specifically on their global grant making, because that company wants their philanthropy to look like where their employees live and work. And so our grantees in those partnerships are typically identified by employees who have been volunteering with and working with nonprofits in their community, whether it's in Russia, Mexico, Nepal, wherever Ford might have plants and operations. So the donor identified nonprofits are already, through the program design, inherently community based. So I hope that answers.
Great, thank you. Yeah, thank you. Appreciate that feedback. That's all the time we have for questions today, but as we begin to wrap up, I want to provide the audience with some actionable thoughts from our conversation. Use a variety of funding tools, not only grants. You had a lot of great ideas came out today in terms of what that is. So grants serve a specific purpose. They may still be needed, but be open to others options. Consider supporting non-501c3 organizations. It is possible to work with those who are outside Section 501c3, and it may be advantageous in certain situations. Fund locally, that's been a key issue that's been brought up again and again. We cannot understand all the various communities affected by a disaster. Local organizations, people have the knowledge, history, connections to effectively support their communities throughout all phases of disaster. Take time to develop these relationships and include the community in your planning. You can find many resources that can assist you on CDP's website. The Issues Insight provide an introductory look at disasters and responses. Disaster profiles provide regular information about the impact of a disaster and the needs of the community to inform philanthropy and how they can help. Our Disaster Philanthropy Playbook is now hosted on our main site, provides numerous resources for those planning disaster funding. There's a monthly newsletter full of information and regular blogs, including our weekly What We're Watching, that highlights disasters around the world. The CDP staff team is always available to provide guidance. And if you need more in-depth assistance, we also provide a variety of consulting services. You can find more information about our work at disasterphilanthropy.org. We're joining with Mercy Corps on September 7th to talk about the global hunger crisis and famine prevention in the Horn of Africa. On October 13th, our webinar will focus on mobile homes and disasters, including the way in which mobile homes can play a role in disaster recovery. Watch our website for more details on these upcoming events. In order to respect everyone's time and keep this to the hour, unfortunately, that is all the time we have for today. Thank you to our co-sponsors, to Baylen, Courtney, and Lita for taking the time to share their insights with us. Please take a moment to complete our post-webinar survey to let us know what you liked and what you would like to see in future webinars. It will automatically pop up when you exit this webinar. If you have questions or thoughts that were not addressed today addressed during today's webinar, you may email them to Tanya at tanya.gulliver-garcia@disasterphilanthropy.org. Thank you and have a great afternoon.